So welcome back to Design for Impact. Last week we spoke about an introduction to facilitation. Today we're going to be talking about principles, and today's really going to be like a more of a co-creation session as opposed to his like materials. There is some materials, but a lot of it is conversations and reflections. So we'll start with a story time. One time I was helping facilitate this session. We were helping government basically create this online website basically for mental health resources for youth. And as part of the design of that, they engaged like lots of people with experiences of mental health issues and caring responsibilities for people with mental health issues. And we were helping facilitate those sessions and coming to the group with, here's what government's thinking about this thing. What are your thoughts? They give us feedback, things like that. And I remember one session, like we were facilitating the whole day. And then at the end of the day, we walked out to talk to the clients about like, how's the session going, blah, blah, blah. And then the door of the room got closed, right? And you couldn't really hear much, but there's sort of like tension in the air just started to rise. I was like just standing for 10 minutes waiting. Just we wanted to go inside to get our stuff to go back to the hotel, but the door was closed. There seemed to be like a serious conversation, and then the door would open and someone would walk out and they'd look either really upset or crying, and then the door would close again, and we're stuck in that middle where it's like this group of people really want to have an important conversation. Clearly, as facilitators, you're left outside of that. And I remember specifically the next day, eventually they opened the room, everyone left, and we got our stuff and went home. And I remember specifically the next day, and that night, like over dinner, we were thinking like as facilitators, what are the choices that we had to make? Did we want to acknowledge this head on and facilitate a conversation about what it is that they were trying to talk about? Or did we just, because we weren't in the room, did we want to ignore it? And I think as a facilitator, you're often caught in between those, like almost like in between two people's or two groups relationships with each other in terms of deciding, is this something I want to facilitate, or am I here just to facilitate a conversation? I think in the end, we decided to tackle it head on and have an open discussion about it in terms of what's happening, how can we help, type of thing. But yeah, I wanted to share that experience as something that's fairly common when you're facilitating conversations between groups of people that might not have a lot in common. Does anyone have any similar stories? Like almost like being caught in the middle? Dan, you got any stories from the field? You're on mute.
Yeah, constantly. Some specific stories. A lot of what I was doing was working with First Nations communities and in Canada and much of the world in relations between Indigenous communities and different projects. That was often what I was facilitating, and especially with youth work, it's an awesome place that there's lots of different companies and projects and nonprofits that want to do things in First Nations communities, but really don't know how to go about doing that. And there's often a lot of explaining and go between even just facilitating a discussion about people coming and volunteering or this and that. It's really making sure people know what they're doing and why they're doing and how they can be introduced to the community correctly and what certain protocols are. And being in that space can be difficult as not a non-First Nations person, because I'm like very in the communities that I've worked in, but also I'm not actually from the community and I can't speak from the community. So it's a tightrope of like knowledge and sharing and bridging the gap while also like knowing my place.
Yeah,
that's gotta be a huge challenge. I volunteered a bit in an online community last summer, and it was just, I think facilitation takes a whole different meaning, and I don't think I saw anyone do a good case of it, because everyone was remote because there was just the pandemic had just hit, and then everyone was a volunteer. And and people had different levels of expertise, which I'm guessing Dan is in your case as well. Some people might have a lot been there, done that, and they're just there to give, and some are not that experienced but want to do something. And how do you facilitate all the energy and channel it? That's a that's a challenge and a half and more.
Sorry, my speakers went garbly. What was the question again? Sorry, that was a long thing you said, but I couldn't hear a word of it. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. I was saying, in a volunteer organization, since you have different levels of volunteers, with experience, without experience, with the willing, with the background, it's not chosen bunch of people, which happens in an organization. It's everyone who has a willingness to serve. And then, how do you channel and facilitate all these different energies and different level of expertise to get something productive? That's a challenge and a half and maybe more, just to understand how do you funnel it through into something productive.
I guess it's really case by case basis, specifically working with First Nations communities. Luckily, there's always been elders and teachings to base things upon. Like there's often a like cultural community basis for how circles are done, how introductions are done, how people work with and so a lot of that is nice because that can be some of the stuff that a facilitator has to decide maybe in another case can be deferred and should be deferred to knowledge keepers, but also just adapting on the fly. A lot of figuring it out and going between and working out and really just making sure people are kept informed and really trying to understand where people, the user experience part comes from when there's volunteers, really understanding why people want to volunteer in the first place and how to work with that and play into that specific reasoning. Because the good thing about volunteers is generally, in my experience, volunteers will burn themselves out doing like they want to be doing. So it's not necessarily motivating. It's really just like educating and course correcting.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Sherpa that we were talking about yesterday. Not yesterday, like last week, in terms of if you're trying to help people climb a mountain, it's like you need to guide them along the way. You need to tell them, no, these are like boundaries and they're there for a good reason. And maybe let's do that instead. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Channeling, I think, is a really good way of putting it. Again, like putting the rocks in place so the river can flow a specific way, as opposed to just flooding. All right. Does anyone remember last week's homework or challenge? Carl, you weren't here, so you get a free pass. So if you maybe reflect on it now, think about a conversation that was unproductive and reflect on what can make it better. Maybe just take a minute if you haven't already done that. So Sheen, you got something to share?
Yeah, it's blank. I looked at my homework. I see my note. It says homework, find a conversation, how you can make it productive. That's how I wrote it. But yeah, there's nothing below it.
Badr, any reflections on this last week?
Yeah.
Productive. When we say unproductive, it's the definition of unproductive discussion may be subjective because sometimes it's the untold discussion that jump in. It's you remember when yes you shared with us last week about the agenda, and sometimes this unproductive discussion is the real agenda, or it's the real topic, or it's the real discussion that's happened. It just is not officially what we commit to it, or it's when we design the session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because I don't.
Conversation that needs to happen. I would call that productive, though. If it's the conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, because I don't. Maybe I'm getting it a little bit easy because you are a professional environment. There is rules, there are hierarchy, there is depends of the culture of the companies. Company are hierarchical. It's easy. People when they go to the room, they know what they want. It's like a military style. It's not military, but thinking is that I am a DP. You have a DP. You have a VP. You have whatever in the room. Everybody have to. We are here to find a solution. But when you have a more cooperative, cooperative is a non-profit organization, it's more democratic way of taking decision. Sometimes this, yes, the unproductive may be a little bit hard, but still in this instance, it's not unproductive, it's just the agenda. You try to force a certain agenda, and people sometimes in the meeting, they stretch it and they want to move it their way. It's their way to come up to a momentum, a common objective, but not necessarily unproductive. A professional work, I have a hard time. I have a hard time to remember a meeting where people are just wasting time. It's not just wasting time. They are, I don't know how to explain it properly, but I didn't have experience on real unproductive. Most of the time is just off the record or out, but still it matters to somebody. It just we didn't take it on consideration when we are building the agenda.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been part of conversations where everyone agrees to something, or someone says an idea and no one makes a comment, so that's taken as like the way forward, and then you walk out of the meeting and then someone's would definitely not doing that. In that case, I would classify that as like an unproductive conversation, because it's, yeah, I agree, it's like not really a conversation, right? Someone just tried to assert themselves, but then we walk out of the room and no action's actually taken. What about you guys? Any thoughts?
I'm guessing unproductive is when everyone's not on the same page what needs to be done. It could be because of the interpretation of what needs to be done is different, and hence whatever actions are done are not aligned. It's because, like you said, Abraham, that XYZ person said that we're not doing that. It could be because they perceive this is what needs to be done, whereas what needed to be done was this. And that's why they said, I'm not going to do it because this is out of scope for me. Yeah. Whereas that was not in scope at all. What is in scope was this. Mm-hmm. And it's more of that. And I'm realizing, especially even in new teams, it's probably better to have alignment via stories on this. For example, this is what an outcome would look like. And even piecemealing those outcomes in stories, that way there's a clear understanding of what that next tangible step is, so people feel comfortable. Unless it's routine work. Once in production mode, that means you've been doing the same thing, the team has established a rhythm, then less is more works.
But almost where you've got like stations, like simple or complicated.
Yeah, I wouldn't say simple. It's just routine. For example, you could have a bunch of rocket engineers and they could be working on something, but they know the same thing because they're in the same rhythm of things. That you do this, you do this, you do this. Even though the scope of the work is complicated, their rhythm is very predictable. What the input and the output is. Yeah. So when the variables change, that is, the environment changes, the people change, the problem that you're working on changes. The more the variables, the more the room for being on different planes of understanding.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing, Sushan.
Yeah. That in my previous organization was that there was one, the team was new, the things that they wanted to do was new, and the processes did not exist, so the processes were new. And with that, just, hey, let's get this done. What does this get done? Has a different interpretation on each entity. And now looking back, stories would have been a good way of having clarity, that exemplify with a story, and this is what it would look like. Are we all aligned? versus yes, I understood, because I don't think everyone understood the thing.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, because I think like one of the principles in facilitation is like silent agreement is disagreement. People have to be like vocally, if possible,
Interesting.
vocally say yes, like I agree, because I think there's a difference between like sitting back, right, and not taking a position and then coming back and said, well, I never agreed to it, versus like actually saying, yes, I agree, this is what we're going to do, or no, I disagree, can we please change it to blah. That sort of almost brings that like accountability. It's people say, if you want to exercise every week, or if you want to create a new habit, commit publicly to your friends or family or whatever, and then that will help you keep you accountable. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today are principles, right? And there's like a few helpful ways, but I'm keen to hear about what you guys think principles are as well. But for me, principles are like chief guides to taking action, right? If I want to be like a calm person, I can analyze my actions at the end of every day and say, did this contribute to me being calm, or did this take away? Or you can also look like principles more broadly are fundamental truths or beliefs that form the foundation of knowledge and again guide our actions. So you can tell someone's principles by the actions that they take. So my principles for facilitation, this is just some of them, not all, because I think over time you realize that having 3 principles is great, but it doesn't cover what you're truly about. But I talk about being inclusive, building a shared outcome, creating happiness in the room so that people are genuinely like excited and happy to be there, not just I have to be here. And then builds relationships, which we understand to be like really important when you're working in complex systems. And what they sound like, right? Inclusive, it sounds like you're welcoming someone, right? Like someone saying, oh, it's so good to be here. I feel like, people care about me, or I feel like they designed the session for my needs. Shared outcomes. What are we really trying to achieve here? Happy, just to laugh. Like it's nice hearing people laugh in a serious meeting, because you can tell that people are actually enjoying themselves. And then building relationships. It's not just like building relationships so that people know each other in the room, but it's like people can take those relationships outside of the room, whether it's physical or virtual, and take action based on that. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. If you read that paper that we shared last week, some of the principles or things that they were talking about was human perspective, participatory, experiential, having like intentionally talking about things and being creative. But we want to probably spend 10 minutes reflecting on like your skills as a facilitator, or who you want to be as a facilitator. What are your principles? What do they sound like? And why have you selected those principles in specific? Does that make sense? Feel free to share photos as well. If you want, you can share photos on our Slack channel. Or I'll give you like hosting permissions and you can talk through it if you want to find photo. So I don't know, maybe let's take 10 minutes. Does that sound good? Take 10 minutes to reflect on each person's principles. Who wants to go?
I can go.
Cool, awesome.
Begin with the end in mind. Essentially, this is what I'd said. Having a clear understanding without ambiguity of what good would look like. And good could be, we have 20 ways of doing this. Or it could be we spend 1 hour of just discussing it. It is something that kind of lays a boundary. It can be an ultimate goal. It can be a time amount that we mutually discuss it. But something which says that if we meet this metric, we have done a good job, or if we meet this. And it has to be devoid of ambiguity. And then the second one was mutual respect and win-win. Essentially, making everyone believe that you are valuable, you have an abundance of ideas, and there's nothing wrong. It's just putting ideas forward and let everyone, because even a bad idea can spark a good idea in someone else. So having that inclusiveness and mutual respect and win-win is essential, and just letting things flow. And then the third one was ensure everyone participates. Having that clear from the beginning, what is each one role? Does everyone have a role in here? Because you have to be mindful that people take different personalities in a group setting, and making sure this may be tough, especially if you do not know the folks, but making sure there's an understanding of what people's comfort level will be in a group setting is very helpful, because then you can ensure that they participate and you don't have the I call them the sales personality, the ones who love to jabber, take over the conversation, whereas there might be ones which have a lot more thoughtful retrospect but are undermined because that's not their style or that's not how they contribute. So understanding those personalities and providing an avenue. Yeah, I'm just being hypothetical now. Hey, if you don't feel like caring, just text me what you want to say, or something of that sort, so that there's each one's role is understood and they can contribute in whatever way. If you don't feel like contributing, maybe you can be moderating or you can be the neutralizer. A and B are two different ideas. Maybe you can bridge. You're the bridger. You bridge those ideas. You're the stitcher, bridger.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm just reflecting on one technique that I learned early on about like why we often use post-it notes is to, again, bring that balance, like for someone who prefers to write versus prefers to talk, like giving, like you said, like giving ways for people to contribute, not just saying you have to share your idea out loud, because then you're just like excluding, say, 50% of people.
When I went through design thinking training, we used to say all the time that only one person can talk at a time, but everybody is putting post-its up at the same time. So all voices are recorded, all ideas are recorded when you go that route.
Yeah, that's a good one. Conversation is like one to many, whereas post-it notes are many to many. Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. Awesome. Who wants to go next? I want to hear from everyone. It'd be awesome.
I'll jump. Yep. This is perfect timing because I was just today working on a presentation around this for design for serendipity, around this same idea of how do we like facilitate in this complex space. And I was like still sketching what my principles were actually going to be. So this is actually helping me finish my work for tomorrow morning.
We accept payment in credit card, Kyle.
What's that?
We accept payment in credit card.
Yeah. I start with the collective purpose of sense making. And I define sense making as understanding the environment that we're in so that we can make decisions in it. I try not to open up a democratic sort of what do we want our purpose to be here, because that tends to get very myopic, or that becomes conflict very early. If we just start with that sort of general purpose of let's understand each other, that usually works really well. And that's important because that's number one. Number two is I focus on my audience. I get away from customer, user, stakeholder, all of that stuff, and I focus on impacted people. If people are impacted by the outcomes of what we're going to do, they deserve a voice or representation at the table. Then that's like the hard and fast rule, the way that I try to focus on this. And so when you think about it that way, you've got a lot of diverse perspectives at the table. And so everyone's got there's a mixed agenda, and everybody comes to the table with that mixed agenda. So the idea is let's try to make sense of the space that we're in, not necessarily fight over what our joint purpose is. We might not actually have a joint purpose, but we do have to coexist in this space. The other way that we do that, my third one, is by agreeing on what's coherent. When we get into some sort of conflict, it's not necessarily who's right, but more, can these two ideas coexist at the same time? And if yes, put them both up there. The other is, and this is great, my partner at work is really amazing as a facilitator. She is great at humbling everybody and borderline humiliating everybody in a way that gets everybody on the same level. I went to one of her workshops 3 years ago, and when we walked in the door, we all wore like funny like face stuff, like we had wax lips, or we had Groucho Marx glasses and noses, or something stupid, but it took everybody to a level of, okay, like we're all just wearing something silly now. We're out of our workspace. We're out of our titles. We're all a little bit goofy, and that's cool. And it knocked us down out of a place of hierarchy, which was great. So I try to mirror that humility as being my fourth principle. That's, we need to be a flat structure when we're working in a workshop. The other is, I love bad ideas. I emphasize, like, not necessarily a safe space for bad ideas, but just bring them out because it inspires other people to add on to that. I love yes and yes or, as opposed to, we don't do no's, like that's a bad idea, no, that won't work. Instead, yes, and we could also do this, or yes, but have you considered how you would solve for this, or yes, or how could we solve for this as well, like those sort of things. But there's always a yes, not a no, because we don't shoot it down. And then lastly, and this is like the core principle, is something called courteous conflict. And I illustrate this as like shopping at the grocery store. Like we all have, again, our mixed agendas, and somehow we can all navigate a whole bunch of shopping carts and tight aisles and figure it out. And we're used to it, but that's how we navigate complex space. A bunch of individuals with individual identity and individual intent. The way that we do that is not necessarily saying that we all have to assimilate to the same exact idea, but again, it goes back to that sort of idea of coherence of, if we all have agency in the system, then we can have multiple coherent ideas that are active and working, and experiment in that space and see what works.
Wow.
So yeah.
Awesome. I have a couple of reflections, but I'll share them later. Awesome. Who wants to go next?
I can go. So I've got, what did I write? 5 here. And this is part of, this is again, perfect timing. I've been trying to come up with a mission and value statement for some of the different work that I do. So this is partially coming out of that, but enthusiasm, it sounds like yes, or yeehaw. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think that is what I try and foster, and it's also a gift that I bring, and recognizing that and owning that, like coming from youth work, like sometimes you're waking up at 5 in the morning and it's raining and you gotta volunteer digging a hole or something, and it's really just bringing that about. I tend to come with a lot of enthusiasm naturally, and I've been constantly learning techniques to foster that, and that's just what makes me feel alive. I know when I'm enthused, and that can be in physically doing something or even ideas, that's when I'm most doing the best empathetic listening, when it's, oh yeah, yes, and when I'm truly enthused about it. So it's like learning to manufacture enthusiasm or foster it. Yeah, and in intention, yeah, just being clear, that's both why and what, really understanding what everyone's goals are and what my own goals are in a project before starting. Spontaneity and play, that kind of goes with enthusiasm, but I've been again, like really, I've done everything, including got into design because I really want to play. Like I love, that's why I got into youth work. That's why I've done travel. That's why I've done all these things. And I have been getting and hope to get more play out of design work as well. And there's so many ways that is actually fosters productive work. I think I've received some of the best lessons. I know a lot of working specifically with First Nations communities, there's this, specifically with the spontaneity, there's a bit of an expectation sometimes that you take the time to chat and get to know people. And especially with elders, a lot of the time, you don't go in just like all business. You chat, you have room for spontaneity. And luckily, when working in that environment, there's time for that, and there's an expectation and allowance in plans for that. And out of that comes some of the best work. Like you're chatting about something unrelated and you get a little piece of information about someone who does a great workshop or someone who has knowledge on a certain thing that you've been looking for the youth. Yeah, spontaneity and play and empathetic connection. Again, that's between me and as a facilitator, but also I want to foster that between everybody. I think it's another level of, I've used the word respect, and respect is very important, but I really want to try and own even deeper than respect. Like I really want to own more the idea that you like, it's even, if you want to go full hippie on it, it's love, it's empathetic connection, it's understanding, it's humanity, and just coming strongly from that angle and owning that and fostering that, because it's real in life and business, and it's what I want. Yeah, so it's also therefore what I want to build in work. And shared wisdom, just remembering and recognizing that everybody has gold, and a lot of people don't know how to express it, and just stepping out of the way. And often most often the best facilitating is not teaching, it's really just allowing people to let out their gold nuggets and feel comfortable and safe and know that people are going to be enthusiastic about it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dan. I think similar ideas to some of the ones and new ones. I love your idea about like spontaneity and play. And you don't hear that a lot in work. Awesome. All right. Last but not least, Ben.
I will say, like all my colleagues, that's what you mentioned. I copy paste what you said because it's I really love it. There is the context when you facilitate. Depends what is the context you are in. You are 10 years in the company. There is a way, whatever you ask from yourself, the way how you approach the subject, versus where a new nobody. You are just here because for a specific project, for a specific timeline. What I'm mentioning here is specific project, like external intervention. I love when I comes in. There is a lot of agenda. There is a lot of perceptions. There is a lot of way to see stuff before our meeting. But before we get our meeting, we should be ensured that everybody in the room are clear what is the purpose of our meeting, what we are here now today. And after that, what your interpretation or whatever the project, it's another discussion for another day. Again, I come back to nobody left behind, because the way I see this kind of intervention is one of the steps, maybe the second step, but very important, and you cannot go back. Take an example. We are in transformation. We want to do an IT project, and now we're discussing what is the scope of this project. And when you are scoping the project, we are here, we are facilitating, everybody's in the room. Definitely you want to be clear, you want to hear everybody, but whatever the outcome of the meeting, it will be a sign off. and there is a lot of other decision will be taken based on the outcome of this meeting. You cannot go back. You cannot go say, okay, we was not clear, let's add this one. No, we are talking a lot of money, and sometimes it's too late. That's why clarity and nobody left behind in the sense that everybody, it's my way to say, everybody accountability. Everybody who is in the room, he had the time to share his thought. Once we decide, it's like a sign off on whatever the second step. And how this clarity, and this clarity is the way how we prepare the meeting. It's the preparation before the communication, the way how the meeting is prepared, how the agenda is prepared, who is in the room. There is clear that we know what we are there. And I agree with Kai. Most of the time you invite, we are not in democratic. It's not, I don't want to see like coming from me. We're not a democracy. It's not always the best thing. No, okay, I will say it. There is a way to, you want to ensure I'm back because I don't want to feel like dictator guy is like a Mussolini. No, it's just sometimes if you don't put boundary, it's clear you go everywhere and you don't, no outcomes comes from. Then sometimes the people who's invited is selected and sure is selected. They are aware and they know where they are. They will talk from which aspect of the project, whatever initiative, and they are responsible of this piece. You are here just to facilitate, but at the end, they are representing their group. Example, market, the one sitting is representing marketing. Finance is finance. Nobody can come up because they will report to their VPs, whatever, to say, here is the decision on your behalf. Here is what we said. You don't want to somebody come back to you and said after, okay, I didn't talk, we didn't hear this. Everybody have to talk. The last one is the nudge. I want the nudge in the sense or make a difference. I hate waste time. I hate waste my time, and I hate waste time of people. And when people are in the room, at least whatever we decide, if we didn't decide it, it's okay because there is a reason. There is a reason, but at least we make a difference. We made a difference.
Yeah, fascinating. I think there's definitely, I think, yeah, like you said, I think there is definitely a place for like democracy, and then there is some spaces where someone has to take responsibility for a decision. It's interesting, like talking about like humility and like power at play. One concrete example I can think of, and it's like something so small, but it just, I don't know, I think it talks to that. The idea of like name tags back when we were doing like physical like facilitation, people would like, I remember like talking to two facilitators, both like working with me. One was Charlie, who you guys know, and Charlie was saying that we should just give people masking tape, they write on it, their name on it, and then they put it. And then one was saying, no, we should like print name tags with like people's names and titles and like what organization they work for. And I know it's something so small, but it's like, it sets the tone. It's like one, like Charlie's way is saying like everyone is equal and everyone here is as a human being, where we're all like coming towards a shared outcome. And then one is emphasizing like people's power or title and role and like formalizing it a bit more. And I just like always have that almost like in my head, like what do I want my workshop to be like? Do I want it to, and some workshops, to be honest, like most of my workshops are like the masking tape name tags, but some have to be the formal name tags type thing. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. So what I want as well, if you guys, oh, that's funny, Carl. If you haven't written yours, I think everyone has, but if you haven't, send them to me in an email because I want to compile them as like our almost design for impact approach to facilitation. I reckon that will be amazing.
That was awesome. I love hearing from all of you. This is an amazing team, and getting to kind of, it feels like the level below, a little like underneath some of the techniques and things that everyone is clearly very good at. It was beautiful to hear the reasoning. It feels deeper. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We is always better than me. That is true. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about is power. And I guess, I don't know. So obviously I don't have any formal things in power. I have learned like formal qualifications in power and equity and things, but I've learned a few things along the way, or a couple of ways of thinking about power that I wanted to share with you. And power, I think you can talk about it in different ways, or you can say power, or you can say power, or you can say power. And it really like manifests in different ways. One thing I wanted to share with you was this like video about equity or equality. So I'll play it and we'll do some reflections. Can everyone's away? No.
You could put it in chat. Oh, you made it.
Equality, which means these days we hear a lot of people using the word equity. But what does it really mean? It's not quite the same as equality, which means everybody gets treated the same. Equity is about fairness. It means that everybody gets what they need based on their own situation, because we're not all the same. The difference between equality and equity is important. It's part of the reason the United States spends more on healthcare per person than any other advanced nation and has much poorer health. It's important to remember that a person's health depends on many factors, things like their environment, schools, and workplaces, to name a few. We call these social determinants of health, like clean drinking water for children and easy access to fresh food. We can follow the lead of communities like Columbia Gorge in Washington and Oregon, where businesses, doctors, and farmers tackled the local hunger problem with the Veggie RX voucher program. And the New Jersey Partnership for Healthy Kids is bringing down high rates of obesity in underserved communities. We should be inspired by these local efforts and remember that health equity is all about making things better for all of us. When everyone's healthy, everyone benefits.
Awesome. So this was obviously it talks about like health equity in specific, but I think it's like it's an interesting reflection of like difference between equality and equity, and why just saying, oh, we're treating everyone equally is not that helpful. Any reflections on power or equity or equality?
Yeah, we talk a lot on my team about power structures, and I think you mentioned it even earlier when you have a conversation about let's do this, and then people leave the room, and the person in power that everyone leaves the room and they say, oh, we're not doing that. There's your power structure right there. I think that first step, I think in the US, I think we're first starting to get a hint of the fact that there are power structures, or at least some sort of self-awareness that it exists. Even the idea of the colonial mentality is just first starting to be understood, at least to a small degree. I don't think we're prepared to upend it just yet, but we're having that conversation more and more on my team and in my company. But it's giving us the opportunity to challenge things like we will go out to users, we will do our interviews, we'll collect data from them, and then what do? We go back to that power structure and we say, you guys interpret their stories through your lens and your impressions of what you think that these guys are saying. And then from there, you vote or synthesize their thoughts and then vote on what you think the priority problem is, and then you ideate, and then you vote on the priority solution. And we've already cut like the impacted people out of it. And that's why impacted people is like my big focus. And so now we're talking about understanding where those bottlenecks are, and let's bring, if not those specific people that we interviewed, but like that demographic back to create the insights and to do the synthesis and to do the ideation and to do the real co-creation, and not make them subjects of the work that we're doing, but partners.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've been reading quite a few sort of like reflection pieces on like treating people as subjects of your research or interviews or things like that versus the idea of partnership. I really like the idea of partnership.
Could you pass along any knowledge about that topic? That's very interested.
Equity or equality is like the mean and the variance standard deviation. It's like if you look at it, the way for the video you present it is, yeah, if you don't just talk about the average, the overall average, you have to have a small standard deviation also in a way in your meeting. You remember my example last time? I know that you will search it. I look at it. I'm pretty sure that I have it when I said when Kennedy, the lesson learned from the war with Cuba. I forget the name. I have the name in French, but I don't know the pig something. And you have the second one was the missile crisis. Both crises, it's the way how he create the facilitation. It's sometimes the outcome of the decision is not necessarily of the good faith of the people, is the way how you build the process to come to the good decision. When you are in hierarchical structure, yes, definitely one of the challenge to in your design or facilitating this kind of is to how to break this power and ensure, but it's part of the reality. You not take it in consideration. It's for me, it's the biggest burden on the exercise we're doing when you facilitate how to break this. People comes in as equal, not with their title. The companies, when they are in a high stake discussion, it's easy to break the power. And to give you an example, when I went to a negotiation, when I went in another life, I was part of the negotiation team. One of the things that the company did is they remove us from our offices and they send us somewhere else, and we spent almost a year together. To the extent that my COO was sleeping in the floor with his, because we are 40 hours negotiating, we have to finish the deal, but because they know it's very important that ensure that everybody, there is no bad, as you said, Kyle, there is no bad idea. I want to hear it now, because whatever I was written in this collective agreement, I'm living with it for 5 years, and sometimes it's a lot of money at stake. But when it's high stake, people are aware of this bias. I would say it's bias, but when it's day-to-day business, it's difficult because people come with the VP or marketing. I have to say I am but yeah, finance, I'm the money, whatever the discussion. That's and equality it's very challenging.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember we worked for a telecommunications company, and the project was like looking at their culture and things like that. And one of the decisions that the CEO made was like everyone would lose their offices. The leadership executives wouldn't have offices anymore. And there was like actually a big pushback, both from the executives, because I want my office, it's like a status symbol, and also from like the sort of like employees, because it's like all of a sudden this executive who probably has control over like my performance agreement and stuff sees exactly what I'm doing every day. So it's almost like, how can they negatively use that power against me? And for the executive, it was like, why would I want to lose power? Which I think is, reflections about like how long we've been living in these hierarchical structures where people rely on like status or power symbols to assert themselves or lead, but not really lead, control situations. And yeah, what that's like. Any other reflections? Dan, Sachin?
I just put in a link to an image which helped me better understand the equality and equity. If you don't give everyone equally because everyone has a different vantage or leverage point, you basically give based on what they need. You don't get a stimulus check to Mr. Bezos so he can go to Mars.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that one is actually like what I was going to share initially, and then I thought it would be more interesting to. No. Thanks for sharing. That's how
okay.
that's the first image as well that I came across that helped me. So another, just one mental model that helped me or helps me think about power is the pyramid. And it talks about who's at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So with not much power, and who's at the top of the pyramid with a lot of power. And sometimes if facilitating a session, and what we said last week, people, if this is a facilitator that people like and want to have, say they're independent, attendees will give you power to guide the discussion and things like that. And they'll obviously accept like less power. Sometimes you'll have a CEO in the room, and you're always like, as a facilitator, going back to the CEO to make sure they're getting the outcome they need, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes as a facilitator, you have to step back, or not you have to, I don't want to say you have to, but it's a good idea to step back and let attendees say, this is how we want to lead the discussion. There's a technique, if you're interested, there's a technique called open space technology, and check it out. It's called OST. Maybe we'll cover it in one of the sessions, but it's a really fascinating technique. It almost uses like a democratic process. Like everyone goes towards topics that they're passionate about. They can leave at any time. They can come at any time. If they don't feel like they're contributing, they can go from one group and join another. And it's worked pretty well, especially just to see what people are really invested in. One time we were running this session, and it was like a typical government branch meeting type thing. And what we decided to do was put chairs in a room in a circle, like a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, and just have the whole branch just sitting around in a circle and like with a focusing question. What are you really enjoying about work, and what are you struggling with? And it was like, as facilitators, we completely stepped out of that room, let people facilitate the discussion for themselves. And it was amazing to see and hear how people reacted to that. Like leaders all of a sudden just became people, right? Everyone just became people who are sharing their experience of what's happening at work and what they're enjoying and what they're not enjoying. I remember one of the leaders, for example, was sharing about how difficult things are at home and started crying. And you can imagine, I don't know if you've ever been to group therapy, I have, but you can just imagine what that's like to see someone in a vulnerable state and how the group reacts to that, because they genuinely care about the person. They don't just see them as, this is my boss. So yeah, I just remember that story very vividly. I remember like the stories that they were sharing, and even the feeling of the room and how caring everyone was. And like you said, Dan, like empathetic and actually listening to each other's stories and emotions, which I love. So to end with, we wanted to do a quick reflection in terms of like, how does power play out, either at home or at work or wherever you are? What does it sound like? And then what makes it good and bad? Because I think power is like everything. Power is not an inherently bad thing. But yeah, what in your experience makes it good or bad? Would love to hear some reflections.
I just posted another video from Dory Tunstall, who is the head of design or the dean of design at University of Toronto, I think. Anyway, phenomenal stuff. I got to see her speak a couple of years ago. Her whole thing on decolonizing design is, I think we might have talked about this a while ago, but the idea that it's like the pyramid you were talking about, but there's three parts of this relationship, and just understanding where you are in the relationship, the positionality in that structure. You're either a colonist or a settler, meaning that you have some sort of vision or you have some sort of power in that system, and you're able to have a commanding presence. The other two are the sort of the native space, because we don't work in any immaculate space. We're either overriding something, or we're borrowing from something, or we're impacting something. We're moving something out of the way. So we're exploiting something, or we're moving something. The other is the assimilated, and that is when we are imagining like, I'm going to build this and then other people are going to use it. We haven't really asked their permission. We haven't really checked in to make sure that this works for them. We've just decided that we'll release it, and they'll come or they'll adapt or whatever it happens to be. And so understanding that's the old way that we've always done things, and we should probably break out of that. But that's, if we sat down with in any of our jobs realistically, like that's just status quo. What resources do we have to exploit, and who do we have to assimilate from this power structure so that we can get to our objective, and how do we start to dissolve that?
That's awesome. I love the idea of like actually trying to resolve it, not just because I think yes, it takes a lot to just observe, but it takes even more, and it's even more important to actually do something about it. Awesome. Who wants to go next?
How does power play out? Power plays out in shaping or molding the direction of the objective, and keeping everyone on track, and or giving a vision and inspiring, because you basically set the tone and the direction with the vision that is shared. And what does it sound like? Probably like a gong can get everyone's attention, or a gong can disrupt a commotion.
That's interesting. We've actually used the gong before in workshops.
Oh, what makes it good or bad? I think the fact that it can set direction, and the fact that it can disrupt the direction inadvertently is what's the good and the bad, both, depending on how it manifests itself.
I've just, it's coming from the blockades and saving the trees. There's a lot of exploration into power in a very extreme way that I've been seeing. It's RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the colonial entity that have been given the right to serve and protect. And it's, yeah, just watching it. And then there's also the flip side, that it's a word that's thrown around a lot for some of the leaders who have a strong voice with the protesters. There's, wow, what a powerful speaker, like that's power. And it's amazing to watch two powers come up against each other. It's an intense moment, and it's really wild to see and reflect a lot on how power is just a given or taken. And I guess I would say that's part of the picture of what makes power good or bad, is whether the power has been given freely and with respect, or if the power has just been taken. I love a lot of getting into nonviolent communication, things like that is just really breaking it down and understanding that or either way we collectively give power, whether or not it was taken, it is a collective understanding, and there's lots of ways you can have your own personal power just through practice and understanding and recognition of what's going on and how this power is taken and held or given. And what does it sound or look like? I find with the RCMP power, it's often quite subtle and manipulative. There's tons of just ways of phrasing things, or even it's the classic, like setting the agenda of what will be talked about. It's all power. So that's some of my reflections.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. What was that acronym that you used?
RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's the funny red suits with the big hip things and the hats and their flag, riding on a horse and protecting freedom for colonialists, protecting the Hudson's Bay Company to trade fur without interruption.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, crazy. And crazy, I don't know, did anyone watch the video that, I don't think we sent it. Dan, are you happy for me to share it with the group on Slack?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool, awesome. All right, Sarah, you can see Dan towards the end, see if you can pick him out. But yeah, interesting story. So this week's challenge will be about practicing applying your facilitation principles, the principles that you wrote down. Practice applying those at home or at work, and maybe just pick one principle that you're trying to practice, because I think it's like difficult to practice all the principles in one situation, and then reflect on what was difficult about that and what did you learn. And then this week's reading, again, I'll post this on Slack. It's another paper called Defining Design Facilitation, which I think is really interesting, and we'll be keen to hear your reflections next week about that as well. But yeah, I'll post those on thing. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for coming. Does anyone want to share any reflections on today or things we can do better for next time?
A quick question. Slack, I looked for Slack, our Slack, I didn't find it. Maybe because I went to your, sorry?
I'll tag you in the
Okay,
message.
okay.
When I tag you, you get a notification. Yeah.
Okay, no problem, no problem.
Cool. Any other thoughts or questions?
I got so much out of hearing everyone's values. It makes me even consider it as an early on facilitation technique, to really break that down to get people's values, one or two values coming into any situation, and just hear that it's a beautiful connector. So another meta conversation, but yeah, it was great to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah, it was amazing hearing different principles and yeah, why people pick them. So thanks for sharing. Shin, did you have something to say? Kyle or anyone? All good? Okay, cool. Kyle?
This was a great conversation. This is really interesting hearing everybody's point of view on this.
Awesome. Do share with us. I'll share the YouTube video of Dan and Kyle when you've finished that presentation. Do share it with us. It'll be awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.